So, welcome to AI, the Two Worlds Workshop. We are so happy to have Annie Stone and Aaron Edelstein here today. As I mentioned, for folks who have questions, please leave them in the chat box, but we will end a little early in case you want to do a live Q&A with our two guests. We call this a Two Worlds Workshop about AI because basically it's not if, but when you're going to use AI, and then also maybe what's coming in the future. And we thought, why don't we look at two apparently disparate industries, which is publishing and healthcare. And actually, I think we're going to find there's a lot of crossover in terms of what does it mean to connect with people? What does it mean to time save? What do we lose? What do we gain? How satisfying as a practitioner is it to use AI, given that I'm guessing that Annie and both Aaron went into these industries because they love them? Um, so we're going to go through all of these things, also how they use AI currently, or how the industry uses AI in their work, why it may be a hot topic, what are the arguments for and against. We're going to go into all of these things. But first, I'd love to again thank Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Like Darklight for hosting this and introduce my guests. And I promise I'll stop talking. My name is Jessica Fox. I'm a filmmaker and a writer and a nerd whisperer, which means I work with science organizations and help them tell stories. So Aaron works at Kaiser and is joining us. He both is an administrator and a clinician, and he has, I think, an incredibly deep empathy and passion and love of medicine, and also is someone who embraces technology. Aaron, I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to in the healthcare industry about this topic. So welcome, and he's joining us from San Diego. Annie, you're joining us from Boston. She's been working in the publishing world for so long. She really not only understands writers and the publishing industry, but readers especially, and connecting all those three together in her work. And she's worked for Collins and BookBub, and we're going to hear from both of them about their work. So, Erin, can you begin? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Annie, great to meet you. I've heard so much about you. And Jessica, thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
This is a really exciting opportunity to talk about AI, how it affects healthcare, and really to listen as much as talk. I am thrilled to learn from all of you on this program about how AI is affecting your industry and definitely in publishing too. So I work for an organization called Kaiser Permanente, which is in many different markets in the United States, although heavily in the West Coast. And Kaiser Permanente is an interesting interesting organization in that we both deliver healthcare and we are also the insurance component.
Mm,
So we're very similar to the Veterans Association or similar to the NHS, for example, in that there's no prior authorization for medical procedure or anything like that. We're one kind of tightly knit organization. And what that does is it forces us to constantly look for efficiencies. We're looking for the best way to provide the right service to the right patient at the right time with the lowest inconvenience and cost.
mm.
So we've been at the forefront of using technology to achieve this goal, no matter what the technology is. We were one of the first organizations to use the electronic health record back when it was punch cards. And now with AI, we're actively exploring and utilizing many of the AI resources available. Still pretty much in a beta mode, but more and more that beta title is going away as we're seeing a lot of different test cases and use cases for this exciting technology.
That's awesome, Erin. I'm very so exciting. There's so much to dive into. Also, I haven't seen Erin in ages, and there's so many things I want to ask him. Anyway, this is so fun to have you here, Erin. Thank you, really. So Annie, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation as well. And great to meet you, Aaron, and everybody else on this call. And so, as Jessica mentioned, I've been working in book publishing and storytelling for about 15 years now. It's a really interesting area to be coming from when talking about AI, because there are a lot of big feelings that people are having in my industry about AI and technology. Um, But just to give you a little bit more background on me, I've worked on the editorial side. I was at HarperCollins and Harlequin as an editor and acquirer of books. I've also been on the business side, so doing business development and sales. And currently, I'm doing consulting for several organizations, including back at BookBub, where I was full-time for many years. And that is probably one of the more relevant places when thinking about tech and new things that are happening. BookBub is doing a lot of thinking right now about how they can better support authors in their publishing journeys and what sort of technology tools will be most helpful and are missing right now from the toolkit for authors. So that's something I've been working on. And I've also been over the past year launching my own business, which has been a really exciting, interesting, crazy time, and looking for lots of ways that we can use technology to find efficiencies there, because right now it's just a business of two, me and my co-founder. So, the more that we can be efficient and do things quickly and, remove work from our plates, the better as we try to get things going. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but I'm happy to talk more about my background too, if that's helpful.
Annie, thank you so much. So both of you have said a word, and I just want to highlight it for a second. This is kind of not the first question I want to ask, but it seems to be coming up organically, so we'll go with it. But it's the word efficiency. So in both your industries, can I ask, what do you think is the main driver behind the use of AI? Is it time saving? Is it efficiency? Is it a system in which there's so many people using it and needing it and wanting it that AI seems like a good answer?
I can hop in first. I think in publishing, that's the case in the majority of places. There's a lot of copywriting and editing and copy editing that has to happen from the marketing perspective, the PR perspective, in my industry, and image generation for online advertising, things like that. So lots of work that isn't the core creative work of what people are doing in publishing, but does require a lot of time and energy if you're doing it from scratch. So I think those are the areas where people are looking to find efficiencies. There certainly are also people who are using AI in parts of their creative work as well. And I think that's where some of the controversy and hot button conversations are happening. But I think there is a lot of interesting stuff happening there as well.
And we'll definitely dive into that because I will, yeah, it's an important aspect, the creativity in AI. Erin, what about you? Do you feel like efficiency is the main motivation behind the use of AI?
So I tell you, and this might come across as a little surprising. At first, yes, absolutely. We were looking at AI in medicine of how do we get patients, for example, if they call up a nursing line and start to describe what they have, immediately triage them into respective categories. For example, if they call up and say, "Yeah, I have chest crushing chest pain," immediately it says, "Go to the emergency room." Or I have a hangnail, and it says, "Great, we'll schedule you with your primary care doctor." But I'll tell you the first instance that AI hit us as physicians, and it has to do with none of that. It has to do with connecting with patients. We now, on our Kaiser Permanente phones, have a program called Abridge. And what Abridge does is it passively listens to the conversation between you and your patient. That enables something that we didn't really expect. It enables compassion. It enables the physician the opportunity to have a conversation and a dialogue and actually look a patient in the eyes. This is completely revolutionary because prior to that, you would be playing this game of recording, looking, recording, looking. So imagine that we were doing this conversation right now, but my eyes were always looking to the end. Sure, I can tell you how interested I am in this conversation, but you don't really believe it unless we're maintaining eye contact. So by using the Abridged program, I know that in the background, something, some entity, some godlike machine is getting the conversation, synthesizing it, and if the conversation does go in many different tangents, actually putting all of the relevant information together. So
Wow.
it doesn't just record everything and give a summary, it kind of groups things together. So if a patient wants to talk about their right shoulder pain and also their fibromyalgia, oh, back to my shoulder, it will group it all together and make the note very easy to write. So what
Wow.
I'm able to do is actually spend the time connecting with the patient in the moment, showing empathy, feeling empathy, and not having to worry so much about recording the details.
Wow, that's so interesting to me. So that means your attention's not fragmented. you're allowing it to be with the patient. Do you feel, because I'm coming more from a directing point of view, do you feel, knowing that AI is listening, that you may be listening not just for words, but things that AI might not pick up, like nuances or what they emphasize?
Great point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a lot of times patients will say, well, my finger over here hurts. And I'll say, gosh, so it's your left ring finger. How long has your left ring finger been hurting?
Yeah.
Knowing that I need to document exactly where anatomically the issue is.
Yeah.
So it does actually change the vernacular that I use with patients, um, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Uh,
No.
so it does change the conversation a bit. But in general, it allows me to use more pauses when a pause is necessary, not fearing so much the time it's going to take for me to document.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, in both your industries, can you give me a snapshot of all the different ways for folks who might not be familiar with publishing or medicine of how it's being used? So, and I didn't even know it's being used to record like patient, and I mean, I'm in some cases patient and doctor interactions. What are the other just currently ways that AI is being
So,
utilized?
so besides that, one thing that we like to do is something called one-touch interactions. So if a patient emails a physician saying, I need a refill for my ibuprofen, immediately AI will pick up on that email and direct a patient immediately to the pharmacy. Um, and it can also go into their chart, see that it had ibuprofen, and send a request directly to the physician. So we're
Okay.
using AI for efficiency that way as well. We're
Okay.
just starting, and I have a story about that later, to use AI in the medical record to start to make suggestions to physicians as to
Ooh.
what medicines to use. But it's
Okay.
very, very, very beta, and I can expound upon that because it's a big topic later if you'd like.
Yes, please. We'll come back to you right away for that because that's so interesting. So, Annie, can you give us a snapshot of the way you feel it's being used? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think publishing is at a very interesting point right now. For those of you less familiar, there's obviously the traditional publishing entities that have been around for, in some cases, centuries, big publishers like Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins. But at the same time, because of the ebook and the way that digital media has transformed the industry, there are also lots and lots of very successful authors who are publishing themselves. So self-published or indie authors is sort of how they prefer to be named. So I think the uses look a little different depending on sort of what side of the industry you're sitting on. For the traditional side of the industry, I know that I think pretty much all of the big publishing houses at this point have sort of closed system internal AIs. So what I mean by that is AIs that the employees can use and not worry that the data is then being used to train an AI that other folks will have access to. So ways for the information to stay confidential and for them to have control of information flow. And I think that companies are using that in a lot of different ways, definitely marketing copy and organization tools, those sorts of things, I think are some of the primary uses. There are some big publishers who are also experimenting with some more sort of out there applications, like, for example, as a starting point for doing translations. From what I've heard, nobody feels that it can sub in completely for a translator yet. But that it might speed the process and be helpful for a translator in their process. Also for audiobooks, the AI voice capabilities have become incredibly sophisticated, and there are some publishers who are experimenting with using AI voice, and I know some platforms as well. And then on the indie author side, I think it's a little bit more like some of the scrappy use cases that I would be familiar with in starting my own business, because each of these self-published authors is sort of like their own little small business. So many of them are using AI for lots of different purposes, like drafting up emails quickly or quickly transferring information from, a disorganized area into a spreadsheet, for example. So I think, there's sort of the broad scale uses happening from the big companies, and then also lots of interesting, exciting, smaller ways that people who are working, for themselves or in small businesses are using it as well.
That's so interesting, Annie, because that kind of borders on what Erin was saying about it's going from a time efficiency thing to actually doing like doing voiceover work can be creative work in terms of the intonation and the voice that they choose.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And it's definitely controversial
yeah,
to use
but
AI in this way.
in a
So
way, it's making choices. AI is able to be more of a collaborator than an administrator. And Erin, can you talk a little bit about that story in which AI becomes a collaborator, which is and by the way, Karen asked, we will receive a recording of this afterwards. It is being recorded, and I think it will go up on Hi's website.
Right. So AI is sometimes an um, helpful collaborator and sometimes not so much. So going to the example of the Abridge program that we use here in Southern California for Kaiser Permanente, oftentimes it will hallucinate more patient care than we've provided. So, for
You
example,
mean
with the
more than I do about my own illnesses.
well,
Yeah.
no, it's pretty accurate with patients, but it gives physicians a
Oh,
little too much benefit at times.
oh
So, for
wow.
example, sometimes it will say this shoulder pain. Let's say that we do the shoulder, we examine it, realize that it's got arthritis, and we do a shoulder injection, which is very, very common. It will say sometimes discussed risks and benefits, um, uh, provided examples of exercises, and you have to look back at the note and go, did I provide examples of exercises? Or I just asked about their dog, their wife, did the injection, and told them they need their flu vaccine, which they refused. Uh, I guess so. Every once in a while, it does invent this story of this kind of perfect physician that we definitely are
Wow,
not.
that's so
And
interesting.
so it almost sets up this story of, did we do this? Do I now delete it? And if I delete it, does that show myself that I've missed something? And is there a moral injury than that? Or do I give the AI the benefit of the doubt that, oh, I probably forgot, but sure, I'm sure I gave them shoulder exercises to do.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, Erin, that's so interesting. And I saw you smiling and nodding. Is there like a similar, like it ran with something or created something or anticipated what you were?
I certainly see that happen all the time, but I think because I work primarily in the fiction space, there's a lot less of a negative potential outcome from the AI hallucinating. Of course, there is a whole nonfiction side of the publishing industry, and I'm sure that people who are working in nonfiction are probably being much more cautious about how they implement AI in some of their, copywriting and so forth. But yeah, luckily in fiction, I mean, hopefully, as the person working at the publishing house, you're familiar enough with the book that if the AI starts suggesting marketing taglines that have nothing to do with the story, then that you would have a sense of that. Um, but yeah, not as many kind of real world implications for the AI coming up with new details or spinning off into a different, unexpected direction.
Well, it's interesting because, in this, it comes out that AI does have not a personality, but it's an idealist in some ways because it shows kind of ideal outcomes or it's striving to have maybe,
I
but
think it's interesting thinking about like what training data has gone into it, right? Because it's just a predictive model that's saying like this is the next word that I think should come after this. And so it depends on what data has gone into the model. But in fiction, that ends up being a little bit more of a tendency to cleave towards things that are overdone or a little trite or cliche because those are the things that you see the most frequently potentially in the training data. So that's something that you have to look out for. And I think it's a big reason why I certainly believe that human creativity is not going anywhere because the AI kind of does just do like this is the most common, the most frequently used thing, which of course in storytelling, has its place, but it's not always what you want.
is the AI now with those limitations, do you both of you feel is going to be the AI in a year from now that you're using in your work or have the choice to use in your work?
Great question.
So for me, there is a role in algorithms. A lot of times we think about algorithms as cut, dry, mathematical alerts, and AI as being the next better step. But humans tell stories of themselves that can trick up the AI in the medical field. I'll give you an example. A lot of times, if a patient's blood pressure is high, tell a story of their blood pressure. So the story of their blood pressure is, oh, I was running up this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm always nervous at
I'm
the
on
doctor.
a conference call at the moment,
Oh,
so
sorry, Aaron, 2 seconds. Blair, could you turn yourself on mute? I can do it for
I
you.
never.
I will do it for him. Okay, so continue. Sorry, Aaron.
No, I thought Blair and I were going to have a conversation. I'm worried about the AI saying
Hmm.
high blood pressure due to running up the stairs due to Starbucks before. And it's
Yeah.
very easy for the physician to say, oh, yeah, blood pressure was high for that. But I'll give you an example of a personal example. My wife has always had very low blood pressure. And this is an example of how both AI may have helped, may not have helped, but the algorithms did not. When she was pregnant, her blood pressure was slowly creeping up, little bit at a time, little incremental visits. When you're pregnant, you see the doctor a lot, right? And there's a lot of data, a lot of measurements. But the algorithm on our electronic medical record was set to 140 over 89. Anything above, anything at that or above, blaring red sirens, big things on the electronic medical record. But neither the algorithms or AI were able to catch that every visit her blood pressure was coming up. And indeed, she was developing a condition called preeclampsia, which was very, very dangerous. And it would have been great if it had been caught. But because the increments again were so small, it was completely missed. And it would have been seen by a human had there been someone to look and match up all the blood pressures. But it was missed by everyone. And I
Wow.
wonder about how many things like that are missed, partly
Yeah.
because the algorithms aren't set, and partly because the AI will tell the story that the patient is telling. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm interested
Yeah.
in how the algorithms and AI can work together, and whether or not the AI is going to trust the doctor or the data versus trusting the story that the patient's giving.
That's so interesting. I don't know enough to know. I mean, in your work, both of you have these incredible specialties. Both of you are leaders in your fields. Like, no one's coming up to you being like, can I have your consultation about how to develop AI better for your specific field? Are they, is this like like AI is just supposed to be a panacea that applies to all industries?
I mean, I think that there are certainly people who are doing that kind of research, but I also think it's sort of typical in at least the startup and tech areas in the US that there are lots of entrepreneurs who think they know what's needed and just chase after it. So I think there's sort of a mix of those two things happening.
Absolutely, because you know, and just to flag up those two things, like humans need to create a narrative. You've just explained every single doctor's appointment I've ever had, which probably drives the doctor nuts. I'm like, I know why this is happening, and it's probably not at all. But also those like small little incremental changes that almost would be if you had a personal relationship with the doctor that you're going to and they knew you and then they were able to see that your blood pressure's going up and they know your history of it not you there's a sense of kind of intuitive knowledge about your patients that may not exist with AI.
That's true. That intuitive knowledge sometimes works against people too,
Okay.
because we are humans as physicians. Oftentimes, we know what's going on in a patient's life, and we want to rock the boat just a little bit, but not shake things up too much.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, when I meet a patient whose physician has retired, and I look at their medical record together, and I can say, "Gosh, I know this is the first time we met, but you're taking these two medicines that really increase your risk of falls." And maybe I'm meeting them and they're in their 70s when they met their primary care doctor in their 30s, and falls
Wow.
an issue. And there's that sense of, gosh, I've been with my same doctor for 30 years. He or she never mentioned that I could lose my balance and fall.
Wow,
Um,
that's so interesting.
Sometimes you develop a relationship with a patient and you don't always call them on all those things because you know more about it, about what's going on in their life and their kids struggling with XYZ and not wanting to do too
Yeah.
much.
That makes so much sense. And you know, I don't know if there's a correlation any between like the writer and the audience, But like most writers are like, oh, I know my fans, I know what they want. And AI is like, actually, I actually really do know what they want because I know how they behave online and what they're reading. So like how do audiences feel about AI and AI being a collaborator in writing?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I feel that a lot of the like strong emotions around AI use and creativity are on the side of the creators and the, the industry. Whereas from what I've seen, at least, readers care a little bit less about how something has been created and whether there were, technology tools used, and a little bit more about whether they enjoy it. So I do think that'll be an interesting thing to watch as it develops, and to see whether there does emerge sort of a class of reader audience that cares deeply about something being sort of end-to-end human made, or whether that is just going to become sort of a antiquated idea as AI becomes worked into more and more parts of all of our processes. I do think there's something really interesting there around knowing your audience and whether AI is going to be able to assist there. Over the past decade or so, as online advertising has become more and more sort of the central way to reach people, I've seen a lot of really interesting work from publishers, including Sourcebooks, which is a leader here, in doing A/B testing around certain things before they roll out a book. So if they're not sure between two different covers, for example, which one will better connect with the audience, they might run advertising campaigns that have every other element the same, but just have a different cover for the book, and see if there's differences in terms of how the audience is engaging with that ad. But there's definitely limitations here to how good of a test you can run. And it would be great to be able to run some of those tests when the book is already actually live and available. But right now, there's no way to do that. There's just one version of the book that's live and available, right? But I do imagine that as some of these AI tools become more and more sophisticated, there may be ways to get A/B tests going in the wild with books that are, out there with readers. And I think that could be very useful because I think a lot of readers know their audiences very well, but there's always things that surprise us about what audiences react to and respond to. And so being able to have that data as just one of the inputs when you're making decisions as a creative, I think is really compelling.
That's so interesting. I find that so interesting because wasn't there that Ford quote, whether it's apocryphal or not? I don't know if Ford actually said this, but Ford with a motor company said if I asked what people wanted, they'd say faster horses. And so sometimes, like, actually just looking at what exists versus actually innovating and giving people what they think they want versus what they actually want. Yeah, it's so interesting. And do you feel like people are expecting, I know this is a conversation, at least over here with the NHS, like a lot more out of healthcare than they used to in terms of time, attention, and like the holistic nature of how we view health, and maybe AI is going to be helpful for that.
Well, we'll see. Uh, what ends up happening is you're right. Patients do expect a lot more out of a single visit. Whether or not that's due to COVID and so much care having been delayed, or it's patients being able to do their own research very quickly on
Which
a number.
I'm sure doctors love. I'm sure the like best sentence you can say to doctors, I've Googled this.
I've Googled this, or ChatGPT
Yeah,
this.
great.
Yeah, alarmingly, sometimes it's actually very helpful because
Mhm.
every once in a while, patients will come in and say, I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me that I need to exercise more, I need to eat right, I need to get better sleep, and I need to improve my stress. Say, gosh, yes, that's wonderful. That is how we treat many of the conditions that we've talked about before. That's great. Other times it doesn't go as well as I would like. But there is a lot more pressure in a single visit to tackle many issues all at once. And I think that has more to do, again, with coming out of COVID still. There's been a paradigm shift of how much care you should get as soon as possible, and also just the pace of life
Mhm.
makes it so that people want more from humans because they're used to getting more from technology.
Can I ask too about this is a question for you both about like data sharing, and this may be in a different way, but like part of like the utopia idea, I guess, of AI is that you would be able to access like a world amount of knowledge and see patterns in terms of medical research that you wouldn't get to in like a small little petri dish of just being in California. Like you get to actually see, oh, there's trends in this kind of treatment everywhere. Is that a, a thing that can happen, or are people pretty still very concerned about data sharing and putting things out there with AI?
Yeah, I think I'm very interested to hear about the healthcare side. On the publishing side, this is one of the most controversial pieces. The reason that all of the major AI models are able to do, interesting writing and predictive text that results in something at all creative is because, millions of books were fed into these data sets. And this all happened without the sort of knowledge and consent of the authors and the publishers who worked on those books. So there's certainly a lot of conversation happening about that. And there are numerous court cases that are in progress here in the US around copyright and whether copyright violations happened or whether this was, as the companies claim, like a fair use case where they could use those book texts without licensing the rights. But that's certainly the root of why a lot of authors are quite concerned about AI and the current state of AI. But on the flip side, there's no way that the AI models that we have could be doing a lot of the sort of more creative writing that they do without having those huge data sets. So it's sort of a catch-22. And there's one of the reasons this is especially sort of hot button is because there have been some emails and conversations that have been leaked from inside some of these big tech companies in which it was pretty clear that the tech employees knew that what they were doing was potentially against copyright law and that they were using like streaming and torrenting sites that are basically ways to steal content. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of like really interesting conversation happening around this right now. But in many ways, also the cat is out of the bag, and now these models are trained on this work, and that's not going to go away. So, long-winded way of saying yes, we need the full data sets in order to be able to do anything interesting, but how the companies got the data sets is a little bit questionable.
Yeah, it's questionable. Annie, that's so interesting. I see, Erin, you're nodding. Are there any correlation between the world that you work in and data sharing and needing enough facts and data out there to make AI useful? But yeah.
So the problem with so much data and with AI is a narcissist. AI loves itself some AI. So when it gives you an answer, it is really delightfully enthusiastic about that answer.
Yeah.
And I see in the chat the idea of looking at things for manufacturing. I'm sure AI would be really excited to tell you about this tool and why it thinks it's perfect for you when really it's only used underwater or
Yeah.
so what AI does when you ask it a question is it will treat everything with parity. So if, for example, a uh, politician with the last name that rhymes with Kennedy says something about a vaccine and that's published, it will pair that with the annals of internal medicine and
Wow.
both and say, well, scientists disagree if vaccines are helpful or not. It will not, it doesn't know because it hasn't been trained on all the information of how to prioritize different resources. So,
Wow.
as a physician, I want a medical journal information that I know that its editors are only going to look at studies that have thousands upon thousands of a diverse patient population that comes to a conclusion. I don't want a scientist somewhere publishing a case study with 4 patients that they give high doses of vitamin C to treat COVID. And all 4 lived. And the conclusion is vitamin C treats COVID. But
Just
AI,
describe my household.
it's tricky because then AI thinks that it's saying, well, there's disagreement over whether vitamin C helps or not. There's not a disagreement. It's one person raising their hand.
Yeah, yeah.
So there needs to be, and I'm sure Anna, you have experience with this so much too, that there needs to be someone, a human touch, working with the AI to kind of guide it and explain you can't look at things. This is not information is not egalitarian.
Yeah.
There are people who are interested in truth, and there are people who are interested in clicks. And if
Yeah.
AI is sucking up all this information, it's not going to give me the type of information that a good friend and colleague would about this great study in a great medical journal.
Iron, that's such a good point. Annie, do you feel the same for publishing in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people who are working to develop models that will have fewer of these flaws. Again, I'm more relevant maybe on the nonfiction side, but folks who are working in journalism or other areas of nonfiction, um, I have heard about projects to create sort of closed systems where we know exactly which training data is in this system, and the AI, accesses this system only in certain cases, and then, has access to everything else in other cases. I don't think that anything has been finished yet or is in a place where we can, trust that the information that's coming out of it is accurate. But I do think there's a lot of interesting work happening on that problem. I would say even for fiction where like fact is not as relevant, in order to get useful output from the AI, you need to be able to direct it what to be looking at. So I think one of the ways that I've seen this be, the most effective is Anthropic's Claude model. You're able to upload, a couple of files to use within that project, and then direct Claude, the AI, to only refer to those files when answering certain questions. So, for example, you might be able to upload the first 3 books in your series and say, I would be, I'm looking to create a bunch of TikTok advertising campaigns based
Wow.
on series. Take a look just at these files, but then also with, the extensive knowledge that AI has of what is TikTok and what is advertising and all of that, can you create 20 example taglines that I could be using in my TikTok campaign? So there are some ways that you can make the AI look more specifically at, the resources that you want it to be pulling from, while also benefiting from the like larger model.
Going back to what you said earlier too, so because some people here might be writers, if you were to upload your work to AI in order to do that, are you then consenting for your work to be chopped, changed, used as inspiration? Maybe like there is that scene from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where the kid like goes Mike TV, I think goes into like a million pieces and then like gets put back together again. And sometimes I feel like that about like your book could appear in its entirety somewhere else, just probability wise.
Yes, it
Okay.
is something to be very conscious of. So if you are concerned about, if you don't want your work to be used as training material, there's a couple of different ways that people are approaching that. There are paid versions of some of the tools that you can sort of toggle on and off whether or not the material that you are inputting will then be ingested and used as further training material. And then what I was talking about earlier with the big publishers having sort of closed systems of AI that they're using, that's exactly why they have that. They want to be able to input, a manuscript that they then will get marketing copy suggestions or whatever the case may be, without that manuscript then being fed out as a new piece of training data for ChatGPT or Claude or what have you. So there's both companies that are sort of creating their own versions of this, and then there are also ways as an individual that you can pay for like a paid level in order to turn that capability off. But you should definitely be conscious that if you're using the free versions of any of these platforms, that anything you're putting in there is being ingested and could be used as training data for the model.
You two strike me both, I could be wrong, as like technological optimists. So in terms of like seeing how it goes with your work, and you also trained at a time where my guess is the anticipation of the job you're doing now probably didn't include AI when you were going to school or growing up and envisioning these careers. So I guess my first thought was, how do you feel about your job now? Are you excited by the opportunity that AI brings? Do you have certain hopes? Do you have certain cautionary tales? How do you feel about the work that you're doing and how AI is being used?
I think in medicine, if you're not optimistic about a new technology, you come across as a curmudgeon and someone who is just going to hide under a rock. So in a way, there's that knee-jerk reaction of needing to be optimistic. On the other hand, on a personal level, every time there's been a new technology to make my life as a physician easier, it's come with the expectation of now that it's easier, we're expecting you to be able to do more.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
because it's easier for us to use the electronic medical record, there's suddenly no excuses for not using the right antibiotic because you can clearly see by scrolling down and
Wow.
spending 20 minutes looking at their record from 2002, they clearly needed this antibiotic for this UTI. Why didn't you do that?
Yeah.
So, and my concern with Abridge, as much as it's helpful in the AI tools, is that now the amount that people will grant you for making a mistake or not being able to come up with an answer, either medically legal or with your relationship with the patient, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Uh,
Whoa.
so you really have to be very much on top of your game. And if you're not using these tools, you're going to miss something. And if you're going to miss something, there's going to be a bad outcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if
That's
there
a
is a
lot of
potential
pressure.
bad outcome that used to be, well, that's chance. Now it's going to be your fault for not having seen it or
Seen
using it
everything. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So right now, it's really exciting stuff. But when lawyers get a chance to make it the new standard of care, everything gets elevated in terms of intensity.
Wow. That's a huge amount of pressure for, yeah, that's a huge amount of pressure. Annie, do you feel the same? You nodded when there's like the expectations to do more.
There's certainly the expectation to do more constantly in the publishing industry, but I will say we are sort of the exact opposite from the healthcare industry in terms of how publishing usually approaches new technology. Usually it's very doom and gloom. We thought the ebook was going to kill publishing. You can look back, there's articles from earlier in the 20th century that when the paperback was introduced, people thought that the paperback was going to kill publishing. So it's sort of the refrain that you hear anytime something new is introduced. And at least so far, it has not happened. There's more, people reading than ever before. Literacy across the world is going up, and with it, readership is going up as well. And I'm sure many people have seen the reports of how reading is becoming like embraced again as such a wonderful leisure activity. There's, with the rise of book talk or like TikTok for the book world, there's just so many books that have been catapulted into success and just astonishing reach that some of these books are getting worldwide. That being said, I am excited about a lot of the applications, but I'm also nervous because I think that some of the ways in which AI can parrot what creatives do are a bit frightening, and I don't want us to lose our regard for the human touch within creativity. If anybody has played around with any of the image generation options, so whether in Canva or Midjourney or any of those, I mean, it is astonishing what you can create without any previous training as a photographer or a Photoshop whiz or an illustrator. And I think that all of those categories of people are really amazing creatives and deserve to have work. So it's definitely a balancing act, but I do think that there's a lot of potential for some of the grunt work to be taken over by machines so that humans can focus more on the creative. And if that ends up being the outcome of this, I think that will be really positive.
I think that's such a good point. I was thinking about how many more images a day we see now than I did in my childhood. And I used to really covet images. They were really formidable. And I still remember some of the picture books I had, or even chapter books with those like little images in them. And now you're confronted with so many things, it doesn't feel as valuable. But yeah, Annie, that's a great point. So, okay, before we turn it over to the audience, and you may have questions for each other, Erin and Annie. So I don't want to stand in that way, but I do want to end on a positive note because I'm also an optimist when it comes to technologies. Could you like play out or describe your perfect AI day at work? So if everything was working as it should be, and it didn't add pressure, it took pressure off. Like not the way it works now, but like an ideal AI day, what would it look like?
Oh,
I can start. So some of this doesn't exist yet, so I'm not
Yeah,
saying
totally. This is aspirational.
yes, aspirationally, and I will put a big caveat here that some of this makes me nervous because of the way the data privacy has been neglected by the big companies in the US. So like, I don't really want to put my entire life into AI if all of that just becomes data for them to mine about me and sell off to the highest bidder. However, if we figure out some of those problems, I would love for my tools to, automatically create my to-do list based on the things that are coming in from my inbox, help me size out what the highest priority items should be based on what kind of impact they would have on the business. Spin up a slide deck when I need to give a presentation, just by me, sort of speaking to my phone and telling my phone what I want it to look like and what information should be there. There are also already tools where you can input data and say, like, show me 7 different visualizations of this, and then just pick your favorite one rather than having to do that manually. So I think the perfect day to me would look like a lot of the administration and that kind of work in my job being taken over by an AI agent so that I can really focus on the like highest impact items. But we'll see.
A life trainer. I think that's really good. Aaron, what about you?
Question, as always, Miss Fox. I would say there's two categories in that. There's always competing bandwidth for me in terms of my work and family and friends and going in different kind of areas. I had to sneak out of the house because my daughter was ill and cuddling up next to my wife. I didn't want to wake them up. I didn't want to feed the dog because that creates noise. So then as I'm driving here thinking about my day, I'm also thinking about, gosh, what time should I check? Should I text my wife to remind her to feed the dog breakfast? I would love an AI system that frees up some of that bandwidth as I'm preparing for the day, letting me know, yeah, the dog's going to get fed because if it doesn't, a red light's going to go on, or the
Yeah.
dog's AI voice is going to be like, give me food. That would be great to free up some of those things that just kind of like a buzzing in your ear. The second part would be creating a skeleton note for the patient before I see them, reminding me of their chart, doing the chart review, so that when I see them, it's just less clicks and I can go back and it will say a summary of the physical therapy using the shoulder example, a summary of the physical therapy they've done, what percentage of the time they've shown up for physical therapy, a summary of the last orthopedic appointment they had, possibly of their other shoulder. Because oftentimes, if one hurts, patients are going to create the story of, well, my left shoulder was doing this, now I think it's happening my right. And also look at their remind me of the name of their poodle that they were telling me about before. So not necessarily I don't want an AI to be creative with medicine. I want it to be able to pick out the things that are important to me because maybe I've trained it a bit. Coalesce all that information so that I can spit it out quickly, establish that emotional connection with the patient, build the trust so that we can get into their issues easily, having already formed that connection.
And that's so great. So it's like both of you are describing kind of like the ideal assistant that cares about what your priorities are, and makes the life that you really enjoy leading easier. So yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. Okay. So we don't have loads of time and I want to make sure that we address some people's questions. Again, this is available I know a lot of people want to watch it on playback. This will be available on playback. Yeah, so using Canva to link to chat would be great for workshop, workbooks, forms, etc. That's what Monica said. There's a lot in there. So we have Kendra who works for UHI. We've been exploring AI in tourism, specifically translation or heritage base. So if anybody here actually wants to ask advice from Erin or Annie, please do. We have these two brilliant minds here for so Alan.
Thanks. I have a question about if there's different terminology between something which, in the description side of a perfect day, was effectively an assistant who is basically kind of following protocol that you've trained them to do, as opposed to actually being artificially intelligent and being able to kind of see things and kind of do things that are outside of what has been trained to do.
Yeah.
This isn't my specialty area, but from what I've read, I do think that we've maybe jumped the gun a little bit in calling the systems that we have AI because they are just predictive models. They're not actually intelligences that are able to do something outside of the data that we are feeding into them. That being said, there's a lot of articles right now being published about that we are getting closer and closer to a true AI. So whether that scares you or excites you, but I do think that we're not quite there in terms of AI truly being an intelligence. It's much more just an incredibly sophisticated model that can interact with lots of data sets in interesting ways.
It's interesting because true intelligence doesn't require agency.
Yeah.
And how much agency do we want the AI to truly have? In one sense, we want it to be a mirror of us. And on the other, we're expecting it to be a truly almost self-aware model that can tell you enough information that's helpful, but not annoy you. But when you think about the relationships you have with people, that takes years to really get a sense of who they are and what facial expressions they really mean. And when they say something, oh, that's nice, when it really means the equivalent of like, oh, bless your heart, which doesn't bless your heart. So it's interesting, Alan. Do we want an AI assistant to be like a Clippy from Microsoft Word? If anyone remembers that, I'm old, so I do. Or do we want it to be like Alexa, which annoys the hell out of me because it says in the morning, "Oh, would you like a quick fact of the day about Ireland every morning?" I'm like, no, no, Alexa, shut up. So, Alan, that's a great question, and I'm not sure what I want right now. But so far, it feels much more algorithm than it does true AI. Fancy algorithm.
And I have another sort of bugbear as well. It's probably just through experience as well. Is like it's not very good at fact checking itself. Considering it goes out to the internet and searches to find your information, it doesn't then take that information and form another search to prove, as you were saying earlier, that it isn't just one source. It's like it doesn't sort of fact check itself, which surely if you're developing that type of platform is something that you would have done quite early on rather than have these hallucinations, like you said, that it said to kind of do these extras when you didn't offer that. I thought these things would have been bugged out before it's got to this stage.
Yeah, so again, I mean, I think that that's exactly what Aaron was saying of whether it is a just a mirror, which is I think what it is right now, versus a true like intelligent agent. Right now, it's just mirroring its data sets, and lots of the data sets have tons of errors in them. But I do think there are people working on that problem. One thing that I would recommend if you're looking to use AI for research, there's a tool called Perplexity that is really interesting that both gives you some like AI summaries of information out there, but then also links out to where that information is being pulled from. So then you, as the human looking at the response, can decide whether you feel that the sources that it's referring to are ones that you trust. So that's actually a really nice way of getting around some of these hallucinatory problems right now, but it still requires, again, that human element of vetting whether the sources there are ones that you should be listening to or not.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oftentimes, what I'll do is if I have a patient whose kidneys are starting to fail and I'm worried about it, before I ask the nephrologist, the kidney doctors, I will use AI to kind of give me a little heads up so that I'll say, "Hi, Dr. Smith. Just want to get your advice about a patient. I've already ordered a C3, a C4, a BUN, a creatinine, a urinalysis to check for protein." So I'll use it to kind of gear up what I'm going to ask the expert about, but I'm going to trust the expert over the AI every day, every minute, every second. There's no time that I will trust the AI because part of it too is maybe AI asks me to order a specific test. I try to order it, and we've been out of that reagent at the lab for the last 2 years. It's on back order, and what are you doing ordering that? So yeah, and even what you were saying, Annie, in terms of checking the resources, it's also trusting that the resources didn't use AI to come up with those resources. So with the backbone, it seems like Annie, you and I are still going to trust the people we know, the people with experience, and use AI to augment the conversation, but definitely not overtake it.
Yeah. Alan, I think you were the one asking about using AI for, software development work as well. Is that correct? I think it's really interesting talking to my friends who are on the coding side who are using AI. Many of them are using AI for early drafts of the code that they're creating, but then they're at every company, at least that I've heard of, the humans are still checking the code, making sure that what is in there makes sense. Trying it out, making sure that it's behaving the way that it should. And so there's still, even with lots of code creation happening from AI, there's still a very big human element there in order to make sure that it turns out the way that it should.
That's so interesting, Annie and Erin. I love the fact that we're ending on a note that actually at the very end of the day, humans are the things that we trust and AI is a tool. I think that's so important. All right, before we go, could Erin comment on, first of all, Finn said all my colleagues are using Perplexity now, which is as a standard rather than Google, which is super interesting. And Erin, could you comment on AI for individual health optimization about nutrition rather than curing illness? So like preventative medicine as like your personal trainer, I guess. Is that something that doctors feel comfortable with?
To an extent, yes. The truth of the matter is, it is very easy for a self-motivated individual where other aspects of their life are tucked in to get the right nutrition, get to the gym, do what they need to do in order to live their maximum potential as an organic structure. In real life, at
That's gonna be
least,
my new motto. I want to live my potential as an organic structure.
But the truth is, a lot of my patients have two jobs, three kids, um, a spouse that may be fighting deportation, a
Yeah,
grandmother that just says, "Why aren't you eating the food that I've made for you?"
yeah,
And so it's a lot less not knowing what you're supposed to do and a lot more of how do I take care of my life, myself, in the context of all of these competing things that seem much more important than eating well, getting
yeah.
the right macronutrients. It's what can I get on the road fast because I have to get to my next job and food is just too expensive.
Yeah.
And so all the AI in the world, if it doesn't actually improve the lives of humans, then there's no supplement, there's no personal trainer, there's no bandwidth for that.
And that's a perfect note to end on. I think that's just beautiful. Erin and Annie, thank you so much for joining us. This was like my favorite conversation of the year. This was so exciting. And thanks everyone for joining the AI Two Worlds again. This will be available via the Highlands and Islands, the government's website. And you, Erin, Annie, thank you so much. This has been a joy.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
all.
Annie, it was really nice meeting you. And Jessica, look forward to seeing you again soon.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone. Thank you.